She lived alone, tucked away on the edge of town. People whispered about her, said she was strange, even dangerous. But one stormy night, when helicopters thundered above her tiny house, everything they thought they knew shattered. It started as a perfect Sunday afternoon. The Thompson family had gathered at Clearwater Park, a peaceful patch of green just outside the town. Kids were running barefoot in the grass, laughter filled the air, and parents sipped lemonade under the fading sun. 7-year-old Eli Thompson was there too, his shoelaces always untied, his pockets full of rocks, and a stuffed raccoon named Buddy never far from his arms. He was the kind of boy who could talk to butterflies, who asked deep questions at bedtime like, "Do stars have names too?" A curious, gentle soul, always chasing wonder. But by evening, the wonder turned to worry. It happened so fast. One moment, Eli was near the woods playing hide-and-seek with his cousins. The next, he was gone. At first, no one panicked. Kids wander. They get distracted. Maybe he followed a squirrel too far. Maybe he was hiding behind a tree, giggling, waiting to be found. But 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then 30. Laughter faded. Voices raised. "Eli? Eli, come out now. It's not funny anymore." The family split into groups, shouting his name, checking every corner of the park. Flashlights flicked on. Panic settled in like a slow, cold fog. Within an hour, the sheriff's department was called. Patrol cars rolled up. Police officers formed. Search lines. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest line. By midnight, the search was in full motion. Helicopters circled with spotlights. K9 units were brought in. Dozens of volunteers from the town showed up with water bottles, hiking boots, and anxious hearts. News spread fast. Missing boy in Clearwater Park, and Eli's photo flooded every TV screen and cell phone in the county. A small boy with sandy hair and bright, wondering eyes, gone without a trace. The town was stunned. People who didn't even know the Thompson family showed up to help. Strangers cried. Shop owners printed missing posters. Church. Groups gathered to pray. The days dragged on. Monday came, no sign. Tuesday, nothing. Wednesday. The hope started to thin. The weather turned colder. Rain began to fall. Police held press conferences asking for tips, urging anyone who saw anything at all, to come forward. Eli's parents stopped sleeping. His mother clutched Buddy, the raccoon like it was a lifeline, refusing to go home, refusing to believe this was real. By day 5, the mood shifted. The town's hope gave way to dread. Some whispered that maybe the boy had wandered too far. Maybe the river had taken him. Others started pointing fingers. One woman at the grocery store said, "Did you hear? A white van was seen near the trail that day." Another replied, "Maybe someone from out of town took him." But one whisper stood out. Quiet at first, then spreading like wildfire. "What about Marla?" The name dropped like a stone. People remembered how she lived near the woods, how she never talked to anyone, how her windows were always shut, curtains drawn, porch overgrown. Some said she had cameras watching the trees. Others claimed she walked around at night, speaking to no one. One man, half drunk at the bar, muttered, "She gives me the creeps, always has. If anyone knows something, it's her." Rumors began to swirl like storm clouds. No evidence, no reason, just fear. But in a town that had run out of answers, suspicion filled the silence. And while the town searched the forests and fields, no one dared knock on Marla's door. She remained a shadow at the edge of their worry, a mystery no one wanted to solve, a ghost they blamed because they were too afraid to admit. Sometimes the world just breaks, and sometimes it hides its miracles in the most unexpected places. It was nearly midnight when the rain started to fall again, the kind of rain that drowns out every sound, soft at first, then steady, like the sky itself had grown tired of holding back its tears. Marla sat alone, as she always did, in the small living room of her cabin, the only light coming from a flickering lamp beside her. She sipped her tea in silence, listening to the storm, listening to the world forget her a little more, and then a sound, faint, Barely there. A knock. Not the kind you hear during the day. Loud and confident. No. This was gentle, almost afraid. She stood up slowly, heart suddenly alert. Was it the wind? A branch? Then again, knock, knock. She walked to the front door and opened it. What she saw took her breath away. Standing there, soaked to the bone, shivering, was a little boy, hair matted with rain, dirt smudged across his cheeks, a fresh bruise on his knee, his tiny feet bare and red from the cold, and in his arms, clutched so tightly it looked like he might disappear without it, was a worn-out, stuffed raccoon buddy. Marla didn't say a word, didn't gasp, didn't hesitate. She simply stepped aside and opened her arms. Eli stepped in. She wrapped him in the thickest blanket she had, lifted him gently onto the couch and brought him a bowl of soup she had made hours ago, as if somehow she had known he would come. He didn't speak at first. He just ate slowly, eyes wide and cautious like he wasn't sure this was real. Marla sat across from him, silent, patient, kind. Minutes passed. Finally, his small voice broke the silence. Soft, cracked, full of something too heavy for a child to carry. "Are you," he asked, pausing to look into her eyes, "an angel?" Marla's lip trembled. She blinked, once deeply. Then she smiled. Not a bright smile, but the kind that feels like safety. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm just someone who was waiting." He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. As if somewhere in his small, frightened heart, he had been walking toward her all along. Outside, the rain fell harder. But inside that little cabin, something sacred was happening. A frightened child had found his way out of the darkness, and the woman no one trusted had become his light. The storm outside had begun to ease, but inside Marla's home, a new kind of storm was just beginning to unfold. Eli sat curled up on the couch, wrapped in the blanket Marla had given him. His eyes flickered toward the door now and then, like he was still afraid someone might come bursting through it. Marla sat beside him, her hands folded gently in her lap. She didn't push. She didn't pry. She just sat, still, patient, present. And eventually, the boy began to speak. At first, only whispers. I followed a man." Marla leaned in slightly, not a flinch on her face. "So he said he lost his dog, and he needed help." Marla didn't interrupt. She nodded once, slowly, letting him know she was listening. "He said the dog went into the woods. I told him I'd seen a raccoon there once, so he smiled, and asked me to come with him." Eli's hands trembled a little as he held his stuffed raccoon closer. "He took me to a house. It smelled weird. Then he locked the door." A lump formed in Marla's throat, but her face stayed calm. Her voice came soft and steady like a lullaby. "What happened next, Eli?" The boy swallowed hard. "He put me in a room, like a basement. There were boxes and old things. No windows, only one light. And it buzzed." Marla reached over, not to touch him, but to hand him a mug of warm water. He took it with both hands. "I didn't cry at first," he continued, "because I thought maybe he was just confused. But after the first night, I knew." His voice broke. "I had to get out." Marla gently slid a notepad from the coffee table and began to write. Not because she didn't believe him, but because she did. "I found a little window behind some shelves," Eli said. "It was small enough, but I'm small too." He looked up, eyes wide. "I crawled out when he was asleep. I didn't know where I was. I just ran. I ran for a long time." Marla's heart ached, but she remained composed. "And then," Eli said, almost like a whisper of hope, "I saw a dog." He smiled for the first time, just a little. She was barking, not at me. I think she was guiding me. Marla's eyes softened. "Scout," she said. Eli nodded. "She led me here." Marla put her notepad down and leaned back. Everything inside her wanted to pick up the phone that very moment, to call the police, to scream, to act. But instead, she looked at the little boy in front of her. a boy who had been through something no child should ever face, who had found his way to her not because of coincidence but perhaps something greater. She reached out and gently placed a knitted pillow behind his back. "You're safe now, Eli," she whispered. "No one's going to hurt you here." He blinked slowly as if the words were medicine, and for the first time in days he closed his eyes. Marla didn't move, didn't speak. She just watched him and waited. Because before the world could rush in with flashing lights and headlines, she knew the first thing this boy needed was peace. The morning light crept through the curtains of Marla's home like a whisper. Birds chirped in the distance. The storm had passed, but something heavier still lingered in the air. Marla stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee. Her eyes were tired, but her mind was clear. Eli was still asleep on the couch, his small chest rising and falling, his stuffed raccoon still clutched in his arms. She took a breath. Then she picked up the phone. No hesitation, no panic, just calm and quiet courage. She dialed the sheriff's number directly, a number she hadn't called in years, not since the day the town stopped calling her one of their own. It rang once, twice, then a gruff but familiar voice answered, "Sheriff Donnelly." Marla didn't bother with pleasantries. Her voice was even, steady, filled with something that felt like certainty. "I think," she said slowly, "I have the boy you're looking for." There was a long silence on the other end. Then the line went dead. She set the phone down and turned to the window. Within minutes, they came. First, it was a single patrol car, headlights flashing through the trees. Then two more. Then ambulances. Then the sky itself began to roar. Helicopters, one, then another. The distant thump of blades cutting through the morning air. News vans rolled in behind them, camera crews scrambling, reporters shouting over the hum of engines and the barking. Fair orders. It was chaos, the kind of chaos Marla had never invited, but now stood quietly at the center of. She walked to the couch and knelt beside Eli. "Sweetheart," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "It's time." Eli blinked, rubbed his eyes, and nodded. She helped him to his feet, wrapped the blanket around his shoulders once more and held out her hand. He took it, and together, they stepped outside. The world was waiting. Flashing lights painted the trees red and blue. Uniforms scattered the front yard. Cameras zoomed in. Helicopters hovered low above the roofline. But Marla didn't flinch. She walked slowly, each step deliberate, each breath deep. Eli, barefoot still, leaned into her side, his tiny hand wrapped around her fingers like a lifeline. Sheriff Donnelly stepped forward, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. He looked at the boy, then at Marla. As if trying to piece together a puzzle the whole town had long given up on, Marla simply gave him a single nod. "This is Eli," she said. "He's hungry, he's tired, but he's here." The sheriff lowered himself to one knee, his voice trembling. "Eli, can you tell me your last name, son?" Eli hesitated and then whispered, "Miller." The sheriff stood up fast, turned to his deputy. "It's him." A flurry of movement followed. EMTs rushed in gently. A medic knelt to check the boy's pulse. Another offered water, a blanket. But Eli stayed by Marla's side, eyes darting. Back every time they tried to separate them. The crowd had gathered by now. Neighbors, strangers, people who once crossed the street to avoid her, now stood in stunned silence behind yellow tape. One woman gasped. Another man whispered, "That's her, that's Marla." For years, they had spun stories about the woman in the woods, called her names, doubted her sanity, accused her of things she never did. But now she had done something no one else had. She had found the boy, or rather, the boy had found her. Marla looked out at the crowd, expression unreadable. She didn't bask in the attention, didn't seek applause. She simply turned back to Eli and gently placed his hand in the paramedic's. "You're safe now," she told him one last time. And as they led him toward the ambulance, Eli paused, turned back, and ran. He wrapped his arms around her waist, burying his face in her coat. Marla held him close, not as a savior, not as a hero, but as someone who had simply done what her heart knew was right. The cameras caught the moment, but the town, they felt it, because for the first time in a very long time, they didn't see a strange woman anymore. They saw a guardian, a protector, someone they had misunderstood, until the world gave them no choice but to see her clearly. The media circus around Marla had only just begun. News vans lingered for days, and reporters began to dig deeper, searching for answers, wondering who this woman was who had single-handedly brought Eli home. At first they were baffled. There were rumors, half-truths and whispers. Some said she was a hermit. Others claimed she had been hiding something darker. But then, like any story, the truth began to slip through the cracks. One reporter discovered something no one had expected. Marla had once lived in Chicago. She was known in certain circles, but her name wasn't tied to scandal. It was tied to something else, something that shocked everyone who had never bothered to look deeper. She was a forensic sketch artist, the kind who worked with the police, helping to bring criminals to justice by sketching faces from the memories of witnesses. Her talent was undeniable, and her work had helped solve cases, sometimes even decades old. But it wasn't just her skills that stood out. It was her story. Marla had been a mother once, to a son who had disappeared without a trace over 20 years ago. Her son, Jason, had been only 6 years old when he vanished. One moment, he was playing in the yard, and the next, he was gone, vanished into thin air. For months the city searched. They plastered his face across billboards. They held candlelight vigils, but no one ever found Jason. The heartbreak, the grief, it tore Marla apart. The pain was so deep, it caused her to retreat from the world. She couldn't bear to see the faces of children anymore, couldn't look at the empty room she had once filled with laughter and love. And so she left Chicago. She found a small house in the woods, far away from the crowds, the questions, and the constant reminder of what she had lost. But when Eli came to her door, bruised and broken, it wasn't just about saving him. It was about healing herself. Marla hadn't realized it, but the moment she wrapped Eli in that blanket, the moment she heard him whisper, "Are you an angel?" something in her began to shift. Saving Eli wasn't just an act of kindness. It was a chance to undo some of the pain she had carried with her for so long, to feel once again that she had a purpose. In helping Eli, she had found a way to heal the broken parts of herself that had been locked away all these years. And as the reporters dug deeper, one thing became clear. Marla's strength wasn't just in her ability to save a boy. It was in her ability to rise from the ashes of her own loss. She wasn't just a recluse. She was a mother who had never stopped caring, even after the world had taken her child away. Weeks passed since the helicopters had filled the sky. The town had slowly returned to its rhythm, but Marla had changed in ways she couldn't yet explain. She had never expected to be noticed, to be hailed as a hero. For years, she'd lived in the shadows, hidden from a world that had no room for her kind of pain. But saving Eli, that had felt like the first step toward healing, and yet the real moment of change came not from the flashing lights or the news reports, but from a simple crayon drawing. It was a quiet afternoon when the letter arrived. Marla was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea, lost in thought when she heard the soft thud of something landing on the doorstep. She wasn't expecting any visitors. She stood up, walking over to the door. There on the welcome mat was an envelope, a small colorful thing with a scribbled "To Marla" written on the front. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up, turning it over. Inside, she found a drawing. It was done in crayon, a little imperfect but full of heart. There was Marla, Eli, and Scout and her loyal dog, standing together, hands held, smiling beneath a big sun. The sky was a brilliant blue, the grass a vivid green. It was simple, yet the message it carried was so much more. On the back of the drawing, in clumsy, childlike handwriting, Eli had written, "Thank you for finding me when no one else could, Marla." Stared at those words, feeling something deep within her stir. For the first time in years, her eyes welled up with tears. Not the kind of tears she'd cried when she lost her own son, but a different kind. tears of release, tears of relief. It wasn't just about saving Eli, about bringing him home. It was about healing the parts of herself she had buried for so long. Eli's words were a balm, soothing wounds she hadn't even realized were still there. It wasn't about the boy, the media, or the town. It was about something deeper, something that no one could see until that moment. Marla was once again needed. She was wanted. And most importantly, she was seen. The drawing was now framed on her mantle. Every time she looked at it, she remembered what it felt like to truly heal, to save someone not just for them, but for herself. For all the years she had lived in solitude, believing that nothing would ever make her whole again. Eli had come into her life and reminded her of something she had forgotten. There was still love to give. There was still purpose. And sometimes saving a stranger can be the very thing that saves you. The world had judged Marla by her silence. For years, she had lived on the edges of town, her solitude misunderstood by most. They saw a woman who kept to herself, a recluse, and they assumed she was nothing more than a shadow, someone with a past she preferred to forget, but they couldn't have been more wrong. Her actions spoke louder than anyone's words ever could. Because while the town whispered, while the world looked past her, Marla was quietly showing that sometimes the greatest acts of compassion don't come from those who seek attention or recognition. They come from the ones who remain in the background, offering what they can with no expectation of anything in return. Her kindness to Eli wasn't about her needing credit. It was about healing, about giving someone, anyone, the chance to feel safe, to feel seen. In her, Eli found a refuge, and in him, Marla found something she hadn't realized she was missing, the chance to let go of her own pain. The truth is, compassion can come from the most unexpected places. It doesn't always come wrapped in grand gestures or spoken words. Sometimes it's found in the quiet moments, in the small acts of kindness that, on the surface, may seem insignificant, but to the one receiving it, they mean everything. Marla's story is a reminder that the people we overlook, the ones we judge by their silence, can often carry the greatest light. The ones who don't shout for attention are often the ones who shine the brightest when we need it most. And so, we end with this simple truth. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who carry the greatest light.